Hello, this is Chris Parker with the Business Simplicity Podcast, and I'm talking with Doug Dean, a fellow enabler from Enablers Network. He's in Malaysia. He's the head of consulting for OSR Consulting. And we have unpacked the T word, the transformation word. So we went into the why, what is it? When is it needed? When is it not needed? Some glorious failure moments, and went deep on it in transformation. So if someone's uncomfortable with the status quo, where do they go? It was a really nice conversation. So Doug, why would it be really valuable for someone to listen to this?
So yeah, transformation in general is a very broad term, and it means everything and nothing. So the consequence of that is that you can get lost in details, or you can get lost in the big amorphous picture. What you really need to think about is it actually are concrete elements to a successful transformation and to approaching a transformation in a way that will enhance its abilities to be effective. Because as we said in the podcast, about 70, and now the new number for digital transformations is 90% of all transformations fail. So not let alone the concept of transformation, it's how to do it in a better way, in a more effective way. And that's really, I think we did point out 3 or 4 of the major lines one must pursue if you want to be successful, at least in my own experience, having done many of these. And many failed many times, huh? We failed many times. So I'm not pure here.
The Business Simplicity Podcast, where we learn about strategies and tactics to succeed through simplicity, with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to the Business Simplicity Podcast. This is Chris Parker, and I'm having a conversation with Doug Dean, and he's in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And I just heard that the locals there call him Doe instead of Doug, and I think that was quite charming. Doug is a member of the Enablers Network, as am I, helping organizations go through massive transformations, through large-scale engagement and coaching and other services. In his normal life, he's involved in a lot of other activities. For example, he's the head of consulting of OSR Consulting, and is working with a lot of very large organizations in different industries there. So, and I'm just really chomping at the bit for this conversation because we're going to unpack a word which is often abused, misused, misunderstood, and that word is transformation. I was talking to someone yesterday, a guy out of London, and we were talking about different things. And he was like, "Yeah, transformation, what a fluffy word. Make it more concrete. Don't give me that nonsense about." I was like, On one hand, I get it, because what is transformation? It's just this vague thing. But on the other hand, how can we ignore it? So, Doug, before we unpack the T word, maybe just a little word about yourself. You're from the States. You're in Malaysia, and how did you get where you are? It's very briefly, and what is the core of the work that you're doing?
So I did an MBA program after doing an engineering degree and working in, oddly enough, the steel industry, research and development. Had a complete change, came to Europe, then worked in corporate life for about 12 years when I realized that I really wasn't made for corporate life. Too much of an independent thinker, too much of a maverick in that regard. So as a consequence, I went into then consulting as a standalone, and have more or less been that way. But to be really successful, you need interaction. You need people who not are like-minded, but who are going to challenge your heuristics and way of thinking. And that's when I joined the Enablers group at its reformation, right, which was about 3-4 years ago. At its transformation.
That's transformation. Yeah,
that's a transformation. Why I'm in Asia? Asia is a very interesting place. It has a completely different pattern to business than what we see in Europe and the US. And I think the way I've come to conclude about it is that in Europe or the US, if the GDP grows 1 or 2% per year, it's like, wow, it's been a good year. Out here, if you're growing less than 5%, you're in a recession. So really growth is a completely different mindset and a completely different understanding of what it is to be in business and to run a business. And that brings on a whole different way of looking at oneself and not being content of every year we do the same thing. We might gain 1% market share or something like this. It's like, no. Today we have to really start moving and keep moving. So they're used to this a bit more of a frenetic pace. And that was very true with China about 15 years ago when they were growing 15-20% per year. Here in Malaysia, the growth rate hovers around 4 to 7% every year. And that really generates a whole, as I say, a whole different mindset that I find refreshing, that I find interesting. And so, yeah, that's why I've been here. So it doesn't mean that they go ahead.
Well, just grabbing into that, if with that level of growth, transformation is unavoidable. I mean, it must be transforming, maybe not consciously, but it has, a market like that and companies like that, they're growing like that are transforming. Are they not? So like, I guess what's the problem?
Yeah. So the problem is that they tend to get embedded in their belief system. So I used to talk, and when I initially came over to Asia, particularly when I was in Hong Kong, I was doing mostly branding and brand positioning, brand marketing, etc. It's brand strategy, which is really about how do you differentiate yourself from your competition. And I had a hell of a hard time trying to get into any of the companies who were Chinese. The European-based expat companies, no problem. And the reason is that they were like, I don't need ideas, right? What I need is a new factory. What I need is more workers. I don't need you, right? It's like, yeah, but I got ideas. I got stuff that I can help you grow more. It's like, I'm growing all I need. I just need more machines. So it was this idea of, are you really necessary? And if you are, can you really justify what you have to offer? And so it really makes you lean in me. And it's like, yeah, well, what do you really have to offer that goes beyond simply just a lot of words and a lot of presentations and a lot of thoughts? It's like, what is your ROI?
Yeah.
And that's main, yeah.
The ROI of the transformation. And then there's, that very often cited quote of McKinsey and Harvard Business Review, I think, of 70% of transformation projects fail. And I have some opinions on why that happens. The biggest one is a lot of these transformations are ego-based, unnecessary, irrelevant, and actually it's the immune system of the company protecting itself from unnecessary change. So I'm not sure what percentage that is. I can't quantify that, but I'm like, I see a lot of really stupid change going on. But assuming that there's a rational, strategically grounded, change that's appropriate for the organization and the people, some of those still fail as well. So on one hand, there's change going on all over the place, and on the other hand, change is failing all over the place. So maybe what does the word transformation mean? Like, what is this thing we're talking about? Maybe it has many definitions.
So it's not business as usual. Right. So it's basically you need to change pace, you need to change direction, you need to do something besides what you're currently doing. And that something is going to radically or measurably impact the course of the organization, be it the culture, be it the sales, be it the business processes, be it whatever. That essentially this is an important growth spurt that you have to go through. And it necessarily involves change. It necessarily involves becoming uncomfortable because once we're comfortable, that's we feel the best, right? We've reached it where you're in the bath. It's nice and warm. Everything is beautiful. Relax time. Take the time off. Take the breath. Smell the roses. All that stuff. That is
that uncomfortable point. I was doing a strategy project very recently with a Belgian organization, and midway they were stating and complaining that they were very uncomfortable with the process. They're uncomfortable with what's happening, And my feedback to them was good. And then Marvin, another one of our enablers comment colleagues, made a really interesting comment that the highest performing organizations are rarely comfortable. And they're doing these things that are outside of the business usual. So of course, quote again, Einstein, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So it's out of the business as usual. So is that and being uncomfortable? There needs to be more in the definition of transformation than that, because I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Transformation for transformation's sake, just for doing something different, is a waste of everyone's time. And I think that you pointed it out very clearly, and you're right. What it is that, and this is when we've gone into complexity and into Canavan systems, is that there are low signals. There are things out there in our businesses that are saying, it's not working right, or watch out, things are happening that you don't expect, but that you don't really pay attention to because everything is okay, and you want to ignore the uncomfortable conversations. You want to ignore the things that could hurt you, right? Because you want to stay where you are. Those are the things that you have to be aware of, and those are the things that are the impetus for change. It's not because I think I should change. Oh, I woke up today not feeling well. Let's go and change the organization, or I want to put my imprint on something. It's actually as a result of indicators to you, and a lot of it has to do with intuition, but a lot of it also has to do with simple numbers. You're not hitting the numbers like you used to. The customers who are loyal with you, who've been with you for years, all of a sudden are not appearing anymore. All of a sudden, this organization that's online, selling online, it's never been around, is taking market share from you. These are things that are small in the detail and the granular, but if you look at the big picture of it, it's like, you got to do something, right? You just can't sit there and watch the sales diminish or profits diminish. And that's really, the numbers say it as well as the feelings say it. That you're not happy with where you're at, and you're not happy with where it's going. So those are sort of like the cues that one can take for a transformation.
Well, my thought is there's something very human in that, meaning, and when you were talking, I was thinking about the word ego, meaning some leaders that I know, including myself sometimes, are arrogantly ego based, that I know I'm doing the right thing. And then there's an emotional openness that's required actually to look at the harsh numbers and go, well, whether I'm doing the right thing or not, the performance isn't following. And then there's another step of like, okay, how much is my behavior contributing to this reality that I say I want to change? So there's an emotional dimension there in order to translate those signals.
So here's a really good story. So it was when I was in Hong Kong, it's a local Hong Kong company, logistics company, huge industry in Hong Kong, as you can imagine, because of the port and its whole link to East and West. And this company was okay, but it was growing, it was doing everything, very local boys and girls running it. And they decided to bring in a CEO who had been one of their clients. He was Swedish. And because they wanted to basically say, hey, how do we get even better? So the CEO spent 3 months putting all the numbers together. And he then called in all of the top leaders into a meeting. He showed line by line, basically, they were twice the cost structure of their main competitors. They were making a little less revenue than their competitors. And so therefore, the profit margins were absolutely half, if not a third, of what the market could bear. So, they're not doing well. And so therefore, he turns around and says, we need to change this company. We need to get leaner, meaner. And there's this little fat vice president in the front row, and he lifts his arm and says, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. This past year was the best year ever. I finally was able to get my wife a Mercedes-Benz. She's been wanting one for 20 years. This is the best of times. this is our best time. Never made as much money as these. So you're full of it. Go away. Leave us alone. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
Perspective. And it is, and to be fair to our poor Swede, because he, again, he was a guy who ran by the numbers, and he's like, but look at the numbers. What do you mean? It's like, you've lost us, right? We're not with you.
Yeah.
And he left within 2 months of that. And it's this idea of you have to understand the environment you're in and whether or not there is a call to action. There is a feeling in the organization that, my gosh, this is not working. And you have to find the people that we call the promoters, the ones that understand you, right? That ones that appreciate the fact, because there were people in an organization that said, yeah, you're right. I know the guy who's a major competitor, they're growing. Wow, they're really doing well.
I guess the question, if you go back to that story, who was right, who was wrong? Meaning,
yes.
And this goes back to my, half the transformations that start should never have started. We all know about the first 100 days. When you come in as an executive role, you watch for the first 30, you plan and make your coalition in the second 30, and then you execute like hell in the last 30, because after the first 100 days, you're part of the problem. You're no longer the solution.
Exactly.
So, but how messed up is that? Meaning when you like, what? Yeah, I get it, but that means you come in and you got to fuck up everything, within the first, and then fortunately, maybe there was this VP that said, hey, you know what? You're full of it. Long term, you might be correct, but now we're not feeling it. We have no burning platform. Get out.
Yep.
So what's right? What's wrong there?
So, and this is the terrible story about it, because the continuation is he was brought in order to make the company more attractive for a sale. The founder was in his 70s. He was trying to. So this was going to be the call to action of, let's shine ourselves, spit shine ourselves up, and we will look good. So that was the call to action. He used numbers to try to get there, as opposed to any other type of ego. What was super interesting about it is that the company was sold a year and a half later at a much, much inflated price earnings ratio. And the company that bought it went under within 2 years. Now, you could argue that the vice president who stood up and said, I have my Mercedes-Benz, was the one who's laughing all the way to the bank because he got the most money out of all of it. And, he was right to turn around and say, we don't need this. But
having been in those processes on both sides of the table, the numbers are present. But I can imagine that very enthusiastic, charismatic, Mercedes-Benz, wife driving, who came into that negotiation with such enthusiasm about the value of the company and wouldn't take more than a triple of the multiple that should have been awarded or something.
Exactly.
And so there is those are not rational processes. So
no, they're not. It's a human process. Yeah. And you're absolutely correct. The numbers are important to underline the truth, right? So numbers don't lie, but numbers speak, right? They don't speak truths, but they speak. They have something that we can talk about. While emotions, you can go up and down and all over the place. You don't have a common ground. As long as you don't dispute where the numbers come from, and you can dispute the analysis of the numbers, but the numbers actually serve as a very strong background. I mean, we run by those numbers. That's why share values are rise and lower, is because numbers underlying the story or supporting the story. Let's put it that way. So numbers are important, but they don't tell the whole story for sure. And you have to know who you're dealing with, what you're dealing with. You have to know where within this culture, and in particular the people that you're handling or that you're interacting with, where do they stand and how do they stand? And in transformation, I always have this bell-shaped curve, right? So 20% and that bell-shaped curve represents a number of people in the organization. On the y-axis, on the vertical, and on the horizontal is this motivation to change. It's this understanding of, I want to get better, I want to improve, I want my organization to improve. So there's like your attitude, your motivation towards transformation. So all the way on what we'd call the right-hand side of this are the most interested and the most dynamically engaged in this transformation. They're called the promoters. And normally, I mean, this is just really thinly veiled numbers. On the other side of that curve, you have a whole other group of people who are basically very happy to be doing what they're doing. They've gotten so far in their career, they're comfortable, they're in charge, they're in control, everything's okay. The hell with transformation. I have absolutely no interest in that. And those are they call them the detractors. We call them the saboteurs, because they basically will sabotage whatever you're trying to do. They will either passively, aggressively, or even overtly ensure that whatever you're trying to do is not going to. So you have these two normally balanced proportions of your population. We're representing under half, about between 30 and 40% of the total population. And then in between, the 60% of the other 60 to 70%. And those are what we call the fence sitters. And having done many transformation, you go in and the fence sitter. One day they're up, oh yeah, look at what we're doing, we're cool. The next day, detractors talk to them, this is terrible, right? They're backing and forth, and it's a perfect metaphor. Is birds sitting on a fence, right? Looking left, looking right. Who's winning today? Do I hop off the fence and go join the detractors because they're winning, versus do I drop off and go to join the promoters? And in essence, the transformation is all about getting fence sitters to join the promoters. That's it. You can talk about technology, you can talk about processes, you can talk about needing to improve growth or improve profits or whatever you want. It's about people. And it's about understanding who your promoters are, enhancing their value in the company, and getting them to activate to such a degree, getting enough little victories in the process of people start seeing the value of change, that they actually then get the fence sitters to peel off and to come into their camp. And the thing is that you only have so much time. So don't, yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
Two things, and I'll grab on one first. I like the word balance that you had there, because the detractors or saboteurs of change are often the people that are involved in operational excellence and maintaining status quo, maintaining consistency, which is also very important, and I guess in the case of the UK company, where was the VP? Was he a saboteur? Or was it's how do you label these things? And I'm very cautious with the judgment of good guys, bad guys, because there is in the culture of those people, there is a status quo. There's a coherence that's happening, and what you're looking to do with the transformation is actually shift that coherence, shift that, and some, like we said, some transformations shouldn't happen, some should fail. So how do you balance that? How do you use the power of both? The people are like, yeah, let's change everything, let's just break this thing, break it fast, fail, go, and the other people are going to get, whoa, tranquilo, what you want to do, who, what, to who, our customers, where, what, like bad idea. And some people are just naysayers always, and some people are yay sayers always. So there's it's a bit more complicated, I think.
Is that you just don't work on everything and nothing, right? So you have what we could call the North Star, or you have really clear objectives. There are things that are not right in your organization, and in order to make them right, you must win these battles. And that's why we call them the must-win battles. They're not as hundreds of them. They're basically a priority of about 5 or 6, and it could be anything in the company. It could be how people get paid. It could be how we're servicing customers. It could be something that basically says we're not doing as well as we need to be doing, and this could really impact us if we don't get better. That becomes a must-win battle. That must-win battle, you have about 12 weeks. That's our benchmark. You have less than 3 months to get it right. And the reason is, or at least in part solve it. The reason is that that's the window that you have for starting the momentum, right? So you have a 3-4 month window. You have to show progress, and progress means improvement for most of the people in the organization, be it that they are less stressed or that they have more productivity or something that is of value to them, right? So what does this change mean to me? And not everyone, but those that count. Because what you're doing is you're then going through this three-month process or a 12-week process, and you're showing improvements. Showing improvements is transformation. And a transformative organization moves forward, right? So that will allow you then to say to the promoters who are working on this, hey, good job. We're starting to see change. Well done. That with, like the famous drop, the dripping water, with time and with successes, accumulates and basically starts the process rolling forward, and people start believing. And every so often you get a true saboteur to move over. So in the case of our famous saboteur, because I would call him a saboteur, he stood up in front of his CEO and told him he was full of gunk, right? and everyone cheers, right? So that is kind of like sabotaging the CEO and his transformation. But there it could have happened that had the CEO taken the time to talk to them and to understand their perspective and to try to show the argument in a human way, that it's not just about your wife getting her Mercedes, it's actually about other things, that all of us are in this together, and that if we don't get things moving forward, we will suffer in the long term, right? So the message and how you formulate it, how you communicate it, how you interact.
Well, I think a failure of that CEO, clearly he didn't know the organization, because he sat up in a plenary in front of a VP who was obviously an opinion maker, and set himself up to be torpedoed. Well,
you will never find me saying he was a hell of a nice guy, but you never find me saying that he did a good job.
Yeah.
No, he failed miserably, and he realized that, and he became depressed and all that other stuff. But basically, that was his mistake of not being human, or not taking the human approach, right? Not taking the people approach. That essentially this is about people, and it's about people's motivation and about people's mindsets and about people's willingness to basically step up. And it takes courage to step up, right? And that courage has to be not only encouraged, but also rewarded. And so it's really about moving masses, if you wish, moving people, and ensuring, and not killing the saboteurs and putting them in a room and whacking them and all. One of the major successful transformations we did was actually a company in Brunei. Now, again, Brunei, there's no competition, so why would you ever care about anything, right? This one company that does teleco. So, okay. So, we have the monopoly. But actually, there was a tremendous pride in that they were serving the community. And the community was actually all, there are very few people living in Brunei, so everyone knew each other. So it's like you're serving your neighbors, you're serving your family. But that was never really tapped into until such time as we actually start moving forward slowly, because they always said, oh, it's impossible. We've tried it before. We can't do it. Blah, 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 blah. The non-belief in self. But as we took that community step forward and forward, but you're doing this for your friends, you're doing this for your family, you're doing this for a better improvement in life. What happened is that we started building very, very slowly with the fantastic head of HR. And there was the most vociferous engineer who basically was a huge opinion leader. And we're at now our third workshop with all of the key managers. And this guy suddenly realized that not only was his department moving forward, and he was happy about that, but everyone was. And it was like a light bulb went off. And from that moment forward, he became the biggest promoter of all. He was always the guy sitting in the back. We've tried that before. Yeah. And all of a sudden, well, I see this happen. So I had talked to him at length afterwards. And what made you change? Like, I suddenly saw it wasn't just me doing it, my team, it was everyone around us was doing it in their own way. And when we started sharing what we were doing and how we were doing it, it made all the difference in the world to me. It made that everything that we were doing it for one purpose. So, well, those things. So you can change them, but it's not by accident.
So,
It be by slow victories, building, and you'll have defeats. That's okay.
Of course, because that you can't
Learn from
have
them,
progress without some failures
exactly.
and learning and reflections. Sadly, starting to wrap up a bit. If there's an executive listening who has that uncomfortable feeling, that itch of like, and in today's world, I'm not sure how you couldn't have that, honestly, but okay, let's imagine that they're listening to that and they're like, well, we need to shift some stuff. Maybe is a disbeliever themselves because they've tried it so many times and they've got black eyes and broken bones and bruises, and they're just like, I can't, I'm just exhausted. But they need to move. So I guess what are three recommendations that you would have if you're that executive, something's got to shift. You're not quite sure how to energize it, activate it. Like what would you say? Hey, you know what? Focus on these three things and then call me. It's like what would those three things be?
So the first thing is to share. And because your perspective is uniquely yours. So in sharing, what happens is that you basically get somebody else's perspective. And maybe, just like that famous guy with his Mercedes, right? That was his perspective. And it was the best of times. So that would have dented the whole approach of the CEO had he had the chance to talk about it, or had he taken the chance to talk about it. So sharing ahead of time, I'm feeling this. What do you feel this too? Do you see it this way? Do you see it? And through questioning, you start building up a rapport and a picture within your network, right? So you don't call people up and say, "Hi, I'm Joe. I want to, what do you think of this?" It's really building up people you trust and and have some knowledge of this. And that what happens there is that collaboration, that networking is super important, because what it does is it starts building a coalition. And when you have enough information and enough feel for there's something there, then start pairing a storyline. Why is this important? Because if you're in the middle of the middle management, it's going to be much harder to argue it upwards. But you need sponsorship at the C level. They have the budget, they have the voice, they have the ability to get things going and to allow you to do what you need to do. But don't go to them, I've had this flash of inspiration. What do you think? Go to them with really something that's been thought out and that has some credibility, numbers around it, but also a opinion of minds, right? So if you're at that level, that's essential. If you are at the C level, so you're already a leader, so you don't need to really go to the board for approval to do something. Here, it would be really useful to do a half day or day workshop around the things of what are the issues that we're facing in the next year. Yes, we have our KPIs. Yes, we have our leadership competencies, we have our values, blah, 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 blah. Okay. What are we worried about? And having those shared thoughts, put them down on paper, start looking at, okay, how can we look at these problems? Because these become our must-win battles. It's often the things we don't talk about that kill us, often. And it's talking about the things that make you uncomfortable is absolutely essential. That is the center of everything.
And Doug, how could you assist that? Like in your transformational enablement support with OSR and enablers and other work,
So
What could you bring to that table?
we have there are many different doors that we go in through, right? And so one of the doors that we enter in through is really at the corporate leadership level, having a workshop where we turn around and we just did what I talked about. So we start laying out elements. But for that, the leaders have to be uncomfortable enough to think, hey, maybe we should get some facilitation in here to try to figure out, how can we work better. But that usually opens up all sorts of possibilities and doors. The 1 day, half day workshop is where we talk to each other about things that we're not comfortable talking about, is very, very, very powerful. And that sets the wheels in motion for really the resources and the time and effort. If you're uncomfortable about something, you need to, it's like you go to a doctor when you're not feeling well, right? If you don't feel right, you need to start looking at, well, what type of solution can we come up with? And what we do is not like doctors; it's very much more like facilitation, helping get the message out and so like verbalizing it, right? Putting it into some sort of a process or a system of understanding what it means, and how do we then go to resolve it.
Mm.
So that's really what it's all about. I'm a very strong believer that the C levels, the top leadership, is in the best position to know, because they have that umbrella view, they have that helicopter view of an organization, but they're in by far the worst condition to be able to do something about it, because they can't do anything about it. They're too high up. They are not close enough to the contact. So you need that connection between the sponsors of the issues and the doers, which would be teams of promoters and fence sitters who will work on the different, what we would call must-win projects. And they're only going to be about 4 or 5. They're not massive. They're not long, as we said earlier, 12 weeks or so. And you just get going. And it's not just shooting in the dark, right? This is super important. Probing is not about just going out there and kicking a can. It's actually about knowing why you have something in mind. What is it that is bothering you? Identify that first. And one of the first things you do in a must-win project is to check that assumption. I assume that this is not right. Okay, how do we check that assumption? Before we do anything about it, how do we check it, right? And if that assumption turns out to be right, or some value, good. Now we have something that we can go at. Please just don't go out there and do whatever feels right and whatever you're inspired by or whatever. That's just a huge waste of time.
If it's only inspired without any substance, then there's a high risk there for sure. But I'm a strong believer of intuition. When calm, when grounded, when wrapped in wisdom and fact, that I would tend to intuition more than
Charlie Munger, who just died, who was Warren Buffett's CFO for many, many years. He's actually the brains behind Hathaway and Berkshire. A hell of a character. But he really said something very profound. He says, you need to know your center, your circle of competence. He says, it doesn't matter how big that circle is. It doesn't matter what topic it is. As long as you know where the boundaries of your knowledge lie and that you're working within the boundaries of that knowledge, that's super important, because now you know what you know, right? And you can bring that. So intuition is about in my view, intuition is about understanding what is your circle of competence. And within that circle, run with your intuition. And anything outside that circle, intuition is a bad idea, right?
Well, let me grab onto that in wrapping up. Many managers and executives in their circle of competence, structural transformation isn't in it. Managing for stability and managing for not change is oftentimes in their circle of competence. And if someone is having that itch of discomfort and they know they need to shift, then quite frankly, call Doug and call myself and call the enablers and call OSR, because that is our competence. And what I love about working with you, Doug, is your mission, as I interpret it, is always to expand that person's circle of competence to include transformation. So they're they have the basics to do this. They can follow their intuition on when not to stand in front of an audience and fire off numbers when you're about to get sniped. These are the things that over time you can learn, through structure and practice and coaching. So, Doug Dean, thank you from Malaysia. Thank you so much. I'll put in the show notes your link to your LinkedIn link, OSR, your enablers profile. And no, thank you so much. Because when we talked about, let's unpack the T word, unpack the transformation, I'm like, oh, this is so great, because what a fluffy word, so often misunderstood. And I think we swam in that with determination today. And that was really nice. Thanks, Doug.
It's been a real pleasure. Always great talking to you.
Thank you for listening. Visit ebullient.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player.